All right, I went ahead and started the recording. I think we're going to give it a couple more seconds here, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Welcome everyone to this IDAC or Idaho Digital Accessibility Consortium Accessible PDF Forms training. We are running through some technical challenges here on the back side, so I think we're ready to go. But again, welcome. Just our quick housekeeping, we do have live captioning available. Thank you to Anissa and Captionique. So if you need a closed captioning or would benefit from that extra live transcript, please feel free to click that little button, get started. We do encourage participation. So you can raise hand to speak if you need to. If you're more comfortable typing questions for our presenter today, feel free to use the question and answer panel. And if you just have some general comments or tech support sort of questions, feel free to use the text chat. Nick, myself, and Carolyn will be moderating today and keeping an eye on those as Sharina presents. So our agenda today, Sharina is going to take over here in just a minute, and she's going to go ahead and recap the previous 3 trainings to kind of help everybody get back together and reconnect how we got where we are. And then our outcomes for today, we're going to be able to define what a tooltip is and how it impacts accessibility. You'll learn how to apply the tooltip and get a chance to really put that to work. I know Sharina is also going to be working quite a bit on the communication piece, how to say what needs to be said in a tooltip to elicit the answer that you want. So Sharina, are you ready on your end, or you want me to cover the our series scenario?
Oh, no, I'm good. I can start. If you'll just keep the PowerPoint, and then I have a couple of examples that I'll need to share my screen with. But so if we keep the PowerPoint on your screen, or the slides on your screen, that would be great.
All right, perfect.
Thank you. And thanks for letting me come back. I enjoy being part of the panelist and being able to talk about, I'm here halfway through our series to kind of go over again why we do what we do and why it's important to think about accessibility at the very beginning of our design process. We're creating those forms and we're thinking about the kind of information that we want to gather through those forms, why it's important to think about the way people will access those forms and access that information as we're designing that. And tooltips are a good indicator of whether we've done that work well from the very beginning. And so that's why this is a good time to chat about that one more time. So if you remember, our whole scenario as we're going through is to create, what we're doing is creating a training needs survey for state employees. And our outcomes are a form that can be printed and completed by someone using a pen or a paper, and also a form that can be obtained in electronic format and completed using a computer or a mobile device, a form that has the necessary electronic structure to allow assistive technologies such as a screen reader, those users to complete the form on a computer. So we're trying to make this a form that is available across the spectrums of use. Okay, and then just to recap where we are in our process is learning how to navigate Adobe. Carolyn gave us some great background information that is helpful as we're creating our documents. They were actually very helpful, whether I'm creating a form or whether I'm creating a PDF. So learning to navigate Adobe and what tools are available to us and how to use those tools. How to prepare a form tool. The pros and cons of using those different kinds of form fields, what's available to us, and why we would use a particular form field over another one, and how they are applicable to the information that we're trying to obtain. How to add those form fields into our documents, how to create them, and then formatting those fields for appearance and settings. So that's where we are, and now we're headed into what are we going to do today. The first tool is to understand what a tooltip purpose is, and then knowing how to apply it in that tooltip within that Adobe form. At the end of this presentation, we'll have the ability to create a tooltip inside those text fields in Adobe. That's our goal for the end of this particular conversation. So hopefully a little less to cover today, which is kind of nice as the sun is shining outside and calling for extra attention. So a tooltip and why it's essential. Tooltip is the label for the text field within the coding of the document. So it's what says this is what this field is about. And it's written within the coding so that a screen reader can come through, and that's what it reads, is what's in that text box. So it doesn't look like an empty text box. The information that needs to be put into that text field is contained within that tooltip. So it's a label. Tooltip is a label device. It's user activated and can be read by the screen reader devices. It is a counterpart to the physical labeling. So we've done this work to construct this organization that is visually apparent. We've put in extra information. We've organized the information that we need to gather into these components about identity and about orienting our participant into the type of information we're looking for, and then asking for that detailed information. We've done this work visually, but that doesn't mean that it's accessible to everyone. So we need to be able to do that same work for someone who's using a screen reader device, and that's what tooltips do. So it's not available in the printed version, and that's something that we need to be aware of, but it is absolutely essential to an electronic version. So this is why we include it. All of the work that we did to create the visual organization and the visual context that asks for this information is work that transfers into that print form. Now we have to do that work to make sure that it's accessible in this digital form. And then what we always need to remember is that this work is not an extra labor. It's part of what we do. It's the work that we should have been doing at the very beginning when we're thinking about how we're going to ask for this information, how we're going to be upfront with our participant about what kind of information we're gathering from them, to be explicit about that information. All of that has to do with accessibility. And so the work that we did at the very beginning, very cognitively aware, consciously aware of the information we're gathering and how we're asking for that information, that same process is important when we're creating our tooltips. Okay. So to help us understand this, we need to consider the experience of someone who uses a screen reader. How are they going to access this information? What does that experience feel like? So accessing the form using a screen reader is typically tabbing through the fields. When it tabs through when the device or when a user tabs through those fields, all they're doing is seeing the text field, nothing that surrounds it, just those text fields. They won't see the headings that we put in. They won't see the questions. And I know when I say see, their screen reader won't read those. The screen reader won't be able to access them. So all of the information that we've created there for a visual user just isn't available within those text fields. So yeah, the heading structure that we put in place indicates where the question is. So for example, if we wrote a section that this is your personal information, and we put that as our section header, that isn't going to be accessible as I'm tabbing through this text fields, right? It's never going to land on that section. It's just going to land on the empty text field. And so within our tool tip is the availability of us to organize that information and make it apparent to a screenwriter, that this is, I'm asking for your personal information, specifically for your name, specifically for your experience. So just to give an indication, this is sort of what it would look like, the document, if I didn't have any tooltips available, is that I would just have empty text boxes. As you can see, as I put on the screen here, Lane, go ahead and take it to the next screen. Did we lose it? Oh, there. Thank you. Okay, so this is what it would look like, is just, so all of that work that we did to create those questions and to word them well, and all of the heading structures that we put in place are absent. All we have are empty text fields. So that's why the tooltips are essential. They're not an extra, they are essential. We have to recreate that work within the tooltips. Okay. Each tooltip should be unique. Here's some things that we need to remember when we're writing them. Again, because they just look like text fields. So for example, I was visiting the doctor and getting my medical forms, and there were several names for several places that were asking for names. They were asking for the patient's name, and they were asking for the guardian's name, or they were asking for a referral name. So if I just use name as my tooltip, saying that, you know, I need your name in here, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't be unique. And so I would need to add in patient's name. I need to add in the participant's name, client's name, right? Just adding that extra information that makes it apparent what type of information I'm looking for from the participant. So they'll know what information to write within or to type into that text field. So dates, for example, might be another one that gets repeated. So if I have the date that something occurred, the date of a training, or is it today's date? And so it's just adding that information that it's today's date, or it is the date of the last training, or it's the date of an incident. But making sure that it's very clear in that tooltip what I'm asking for. And so keeping those details in there. Signatures was another time where it comes up to be, you might have ask for several signatures on a particular document. So if your signature, a client's signature, a parent's signature, a guardian's signature. So it's, hopefully you're recognizing here, it's just adding in all of the, that information that helps the user understand what you're looking for and how they can most accurately complete filling in there. Okay. So tooltips should describe the needed information the same way that the physical visible labels do or does. These are, so that, like I said, I keep repeating myself, hopefully that's to reiterate that it is the exact same information that I'm looking for. I have to remember when I'm writing my tooltip that none of that is available. So the question that I very carefully wrote, I need to create in such a way that the person who is accessing it through the tooltip will know what information I'm looking for. And every single form field needs a tooltip. So if I'm doing a multiple choice, I need that tooltip.
Sharina, this is Lane. I'm going to jump in real quick here to help reiterate one other thing. We've talked about that heading. You talked about that a couple slides back, and how the heading might be personal information. And then you might have name, date, signature, those kind of repetitive fields. Same kind of thing can happen in this sort of training survey. You might have your information as a heading, and then agency information as a heading, and you're unable to infer the headings from within the edit box. If your focus is so narrow that all you can see is that white space where you have to write or type your answer, you can't infer that information. So again, like I don't think we can reiterate this enough. Your tooltip may be doing double duty depending on how you're organized. So
great example. Yeah. So yeah, if we keep saying it. Thank you. So one of the more complicated parts of using a tooltip are when we get to ratings, multiple choice, and tables, because here where we relied on very visual organization of our information, then we have to create that same organization within an individual tooltip. So Lane, if you'll let me share my screen for a moment, I will show you an example. Oops. I'll pull it up here before I start sharing. This is a document that Carolyn was working on. So someone not thinking all the way through at the very beginning of their design stages, what a tooltip would look like or how to make this accessible. So if I'm looking over this rating system, I have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 areas of focus. And each one of those have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 levels of a rating system. So although this like visually makes sense to me and you might consider this to be effective, it is not an effective document at all because it's not available. In each single one of these, I have to go back and remember the question, because that's not part of the tooltip, is how does this applicant compare to others who have known, others you have known, who have pursued or who have recommended for graduation. So it's a very particular person that I'm evaluating based on their academic promise. And so each one of these questions, I have to go back compared to other people who have pursued or you've recommended for graduate study. How does their academic promise, is it outstanding? And then I have to repeat that same exact question again, adding excellent. And repeat again, adding above. And I have to do that all the way through each one of these because none of this information, not the question, not the rating system, not the characteristics are available in the tooltip. So I have to create that whole scenario, all of that context, all of that surrounding information that helps me to infer what information I'm looking for has to be recreated in this. So it becomes a little bit of a nightmare if I'm trying to do tooltips here. So one of the solutions, sorry, I'm trying to move my toolbar so I can access this other document. The way that perhaps for solving for this was to give the rating system so then and create them into individual sections rather than a table. And this allowed for me to do academic promise based on this question. And then giving each one of these a rating system. So I have less toolboxes to build. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 toolboxes instead of 37 toolboxes to build. And so it's a less reiteration of each one of those questions every single time. So in this question, I only have to talk about academic promise and base it on the outstanding, excellent, above average, fair, below average, and not observed. And so just repeating that, building that question for that one, and then repeating it for each of these other 11 options. So it was something that I could have thought about at the very beginning of the document design before I started with a table that is so complex that I have to think about it in terms of, I think we counted, there was 30 something of these tips that I would have to build for each one of these sections. And so that's just one of the ways that I wanted to illustrate to you how thinking about accessibility and thinking about it beyond the visual accessibility of information is tremendously helpful at the beginning stages so that I don't have to reconfigure all of my questions.
Yeah, and Sharina, can I say one other thing about this? So from kind of the editing point of view, this type of form, the other challenge it made for editors is it was so complex, it actually crashed Adobe several times. So it became very time consuming to work with. We could make it accessible by adding in those clear tooltips so people could navigate through and have all that visual context, but it was so complex, it was actually kind of crashing the software a few times. So that's where we proposed the redesign. And so it was less editing work. And then it also made it more accessible for the user to go through and infer those relationships with those tooltips.
Yep. And I think that we both agree then this could have been done much better at the beginning stages.
Yeah, and some of those design things, and I think I've mentioned this before, you may not realize all of those implications until you get to this point and you're adding in those tool tips. And so that's a great example of, okay, we have this information, we know what we need, we have the question, we have the rating, we have what we need. How can we redesign it so that it works a little better? And the solution we came up with is asking the exact same information. It's just laid out in a little bit different way. So yeah, it's asking the exact same information, but the amount of time it took to create the form fields, to add the tool tips, to kind of revise that ranking scale, it just made the process go so much more smoothly. So that's where I mentioned, you know, if you're fighting with Adobe in any way, shape, or form, go back to that original source document and say, how can I tweak this a little bit? It will end up saving you so much time in the long run, because some of that stuff, and I've done it too, you don't realize it's an issue until you get into the actual, we're making this form field accessible now. So it's not that, you know, it's bad. It's just sometimes you don't even realize all the things that go into that until you're having fights with Adobe and sad in the corner now because it keeps crashing. So that's where that original accessible source document is so nice, because we made a few changes there, popped it into Adobe, and it worked so much better for us. So, and then we have an accessible document for our end users.
Right. And so I think there's a few lessons that we can learn from this experience. First of all, that if Adobe, of all things, if you're fighting with Adobe, then you know your screen reader user is going to fight with Adobe as well. And so that is when we encounter those, right, we learn from those experiences. When we find ourselves at this point, is that the next time that we create a form, we're going to be thinking about those tooltips. We're thinking to think about this other options we have for creating a document. And so we keep building our knowledge and building our experience and trying to think about flexible access, multiple access, from the very beginnings of our work here. So, which I think is what happened, Carolyn, as you were going through. Like, oh,
exactly. I thought this is going to be easy, and then it just blew up on me more times than one. And I will say about the drop-down box, because we did mention last time that the drop-down box may not be a good option. That's why I added the select ranking option, and there's some space after that people could write it if they were printing this. And we have all those options available on the screen. So where it may seem redundant to have that instruction on the page or in the drop-down box and then in the tooltip, it's really meeting all those three different needs, because you don't know if someone is printing this. You don't know if they are using a screen reader to navigate through this. You don't know if they are filling it out electronically and gonna save it. So it seems redundant, but that is what makes it accessible, because we are giving users what they need for how they are using this form.
Absolutely. And it seems redundant only because you think, like, if you're like me, right, I think about the way that I access an information. And if anything other than that feels redundant, even though it's absolutely not, as you're talking about, like it is the multiple access that I need to create for someone who is not me, right, that will be doing this. So perfect. Hopefully that's our buy-in for doing this, right? And for thinking about it early and for learning through the process each time that we do complete a form, or we are creating these forms. Okay, I will stop sharing now, and we can go back to the PowerPoint lane. Okay. Navigate here. So that's why, but as you can see, right, these rating systems, the multiple choice, the tables they're very much reliant on that surrounding information to create meaning. So this is where our first one was, what tools are available at your agency to create accessible documents? This was from our form. And then our multiple choice was Adobe, Microsoft, or other. So then we need the three tooltips. Right, Adobe Acrobat Pro is available at my agency to make accessible documents. Microsoft Office is available in my agency to make accessible documents. And then I would have my open text field list other tools available at my agency to create accessible documents. And I could put there. So that's one question developed into 3 tooltips in order to create the same kind of meeting that I was doing visually by the question. So we're going to do more of that work as we move into our document. But basically the instructions are you right click on the text field, you select the properties from the pop-up menu. This should generate the general tab. And within that general tab is the tooltip text field. And that's exactly where you'll place it, where you'll write this tooltip. And we'll need to do that with each one of our questions, much the way that I just explained that we would do with our what tools are available at my agency question. But the cool part about all of that is that I get to turn you over to Carolyn to walk you through that process and to show you how to do that. So thanks for your time. And it was good to see all of you again.
Thanks, Sharina. So let me share my, you guys might be getting tired of this form, but it's looking pretty good. We've been doing really good work on this so far. You guys got the form pulled up on your screen?
Sure do.
Woohoo! So here we've got our needs assessment surveys for state employees. And our next step in this accessible process is to, let me move my panel thing here, is to add those tooltips. So we do that. Let's see, I need to minimize this. There we go. We do that by opening that prepare form tool set, and that gives us access to edit any of our form fields. And remember, we had lots of different ways to open this. We could double click on the form field. We could right click on our field from the field list and open properties, but we're looking for this general tab and the tool tip. That's where you want to add in that information. And I know one of the questions we got last time is why do we not use the auto generate fields? Because one of the things that it does for that is add in very generic, not helpful tooltips. So you have to redo all that work again. And basically Adobe duplicates whatever it generates for the name field as the tooltip. So that's not very good. As we've just discussed, that tooltips are essential for accessibility. And if it's just a generic piece of information, then it's not going to be helpful for users. And the risk with that is when you go to do an accessibility check, if there is anything in this tooltip field, you won't get alerted and you won't get a reminder to check it to make sure it's accessible. So you really want to do that review as you're building the form. So I know that question came up a little bit earlier, so hopefully that gives a little more context. So the process is the same for every single tooltip. Date, we have today's date. For name, we have your name. For what organization are you affiliated with? We just repeat the question because we don't need any other context for that. Same with what is your job title, right there. When we get down to these multiple choice questions though, this is where we need to craft a little bit more helpful tooltip using all those tips that Sharina gave us. So here we have these headings to help signal where things are. We know that these questions are about tools. We also have a question that asks what tools are available at your agency. We need to build that into these multiple choice responses. So the tool tip for these, instead of restating the question, I like to change this to a statement. So I have Adobe Acrobat Pro available at my agency to make accessible documents. I have Google Docs, let me get back to the beginning, available at my agency to make accessible documents, and so on and so forth. One way you can kind of speed this process up is if you have to repeat this same format for multiple choices, you can copy your tooltip, go to your next one, paste it in, and then just change the choice. So instead of I have Google Docs, this is going to be Microsoft Office. So that can kind of help speed up the process, especially if you have lots of multiple choice or lots of ranking options available on your page. You just want to make sure you update the relevant information. And then again, I have prepared templates, and this last one, I have other tools available at my agency. Now we have this other text box, remember? So we're going to have to give a little bit more information about what is in this other text box. So for this, if you selected other, please specify what other tools are available at your agency to make to make accessible documents. So again, you kind of have to think about the context and provide all the information that a user is going to need to infer what they need to put in that field from the tooltip alone. Similar format here for, do you know what tools you need to create accessible documents? Again, revise this to be a statement. Yes, I know what tools I need to create accessible documents. No, I do not know what tools I need to create accessible documents, or I don't know, or I am unsure about what tools. So again, kind of rephrase those as statements. Next, we have 2 questions. And we can just restate the question as it is. Estimate what percentage of your job is dedicated to document creation, and estimate what percentage of your job is dedicated to web content creation. So that's our tooltip there. For our next skills section, we have 5 multiple choices, and we have the definition on the page itself. So for our tooltip, for our statement, and just to add an I am at the beginning. So I am not comfortable using technology and don't know who to ask for help. I am somewhat comfortable using technology and don't know who to ask for help. So again, that's providing that good definition that people can, as they go through these different options, will know what we're asking, and they can choose whether to select them or not. For our text boxes, it's just going to be restating the question, because we're not really asking them. We don't really need any other information to know what's going on. So this, we can just restate the question as our tooltip. What do you feel your current skill level is in creating accessible documents or web content? Another thing you can do if all you're doing is restating the question, you can copy the text right from the document and paste it in your tooltip. So copy and paste can help speed up the process to make those tooltips available. And then last 3, our tooltips are just our questions. Any questions so far?
I have not heard any questions coming in. Nick, have you seen any pop in the Q&A?
I have not.
Okay.
Nothing
Okay.
yet.
And how do I share my audio?
You'll have to stop sharing.
Okay.
And then click your share again. And before you pick your document, there's a
share
checkbox.
sound. Perfect.
Share
okay.
Sound.
So you may have noticed that. All right. Can you guys see my screen again?
I think so.
So
Josh
you
says I can.
Oh, good. So you may have noticed that tooltip, if your tooltip is fairly lengthy, it's kind of hard to see it all in that little tiny text box. So there's a couple ways you can test to make sure that the tooltips that you're using make sense. They don't have any, like if you copy and pasted all your multiple choice, that you don't have Google Docs listed twice, that you've actually made those changes. I've done that all the time. So there's a couple ways that you can edit or check to make sure what you're doing is right. So I'm going to close my prepare form tools. So one of the things about the tooltips is it's available for those screen reader users. So that access technology that is going through the edit fields, the user that is using those tools, but it's also available if you hover over the field. So that's one way you can check it visually. You can hover your mouse over the field and it will pull up the tooltip. So it's available for mouse users as well. So you can kind of spot check all your tooltips as you go through and read to make sure they make sense. The other thing you can do, and I think this is really important, and I really encourage everyone to do this, especially as they're first starting out with documents, is listen to your tooltips. That is where you really catch any errors, because if you can listen to the document, I close my eyes, look away from the screen, and I just focus on what is it telling me. Does it make sense? Just from listening to these tooltips. And the way you can do that, you don't have to have a screen reader on your computer to do that. There is a read out loud feature available in Adobe. And so if you activate that, you go to view, read out loud, and then read this page only.
Survey instructions. Please complete this IDAC
and it'll
needs
start
survey
reading
to help
the page.
direct future training offer. Today's date text field.
But if you start hitting tab, it's not reading the content around the field. It is only reading the tooltip.
Your name text field.
And it adds the type of field after.
What organization are you affiliated with?
Can you guys hear the
text field?
The read out loud?
Yes.
Your job title. I have Adobe Acrobat Pro available at my agency to make accessible documents checkbox unchecked. I have Google Docs available at my agency to make accessible documents checkbox unchecked. I have Microsoft Office available at my agency to make accessible documents checkbox unchecked. I have prepared templates available at my agency to make accessible documents checkbox unchecked. I have other tools available at my agency to make accessible documents checkbox unchecked. If you selected other, please specify what other tools are available at your agency to make accessible documents text field.
So I love that because it's giving me all that visual information that I would be reading to infer what needs to go in that text box, but it's all available there just from the tooltip. The other thing listening to your document does is if I had one of my form fields out of order, out of tab order, it would jump to the different tab order. So if I needed to make any changes with how the order of the tabs, how the tab order of the form fields is there, I can catch some of that when I'm listening to the document on top of the tooltip. So this is an excellent last step to make before you close out that prepare form tools, making those edits to any of your form settings, any of your tooltip information, your tab settings, before you do that final accessibility check in your document. And it's super simple. It's not going to be as robust as a screen reader, but it's going to give you that kind of auditory check to make sure what you're using is that it makes sense. And you can just tab through all your content.
Yes, I know what tools I need to create accessible documents or web content checkbox unchecked. No, I do not know what tools I need to create accessible documents or web content checkbox unchecked. I don't know or I am unsure about what tools I need to create accessible documents or web content checkbox unchecked.
So hopefully that helps. That gives you an idea to kind of visualize those tooltips in more than one way. So you can hover over them, you can tab through the content, and it really gives you just a different, and plus for me, proofreading is easier when I'm listening. So it's a great proofreading step for me. And then let's just get down to these other skills so you can kind of see what that sounds like too.
Estimate what percentage of your job is dedicated to document creation text field. Estimate what percentage of your job is dedicated to web content creation text field. I am not comfortable using technology and don't know who to ask for help checkbox unchecked.
Some of them may sound a little weird with the punctuation.
I am somewhat comfortable using technology and I ask for help when I need it checkbox unchecked. I am comfortable using technology and can help others when needed checkbox unchecked. I am very comfortable using technology and I look for ways to learn more checkbox unchecked. I am extremely comfortable using technology and look for ways to help others checkbox unchecked.
So tabbing through using that read out loud is a great way to hear the tooltip. If you just turn on read out loud and say read this page, it's going to read the text. If you tab through the content, it's going to read the tooltips. So play around with that tool. When I first started making accessible documents, I listened to every single document I made. I don't as much now because I am more comfortable making accessible documents. I can kind of spot the errors now ahead of time, but I listened to every single document I made accessible, whether it was 1 page or 20 pages. And it really helped me learn how to order my content, how to write those tooltips, and some of those errors that might show up that I didn't know about. So definitely use this tool. It, I think, is an underrated tool when you're making documents. Just listen to them because that just gives you a whole nother perspective. And unless anyone has questions, I think I'm done with my portion of it.
Turn it back over to Sharina. I'll get that PowerPoint back up in just a second for you.
Good. While you're typing, I can just reinforce the use of the read aloud, whatever document that you're working on. You know, when I pull up someone's other PDF before I send it to someone else, I put it through the read aloud to make sure that it's something that I feel comfortable sending on to another person, just to make sure that it is not an image only PDF. So I use that tool often, and I agree, it is a great way of learning how PDFs work differently than the way that I've always used them. So.
Mm-hmm. And Sharina, you had a question. Did the question about the Grammarly tool go to all attendees?
Oh no, I didn't read it. Sorry.
Okay.
Look through that chat. I just
The question was, can tooltips be spell checked? And
Oh,
Sharina,
it's Grammarly.
yeah.
It is an add-on. It's an additional tool that
For Adobe?
I use it. Yeah, it's for Adobe. I use it with my
Okay.
Microsoft Office, but those are plugins that through Grammarly. So,
got it. Okay. I know it will, I think it will do the red squiggly underline if you have text misspelled, but it doesn't really, Adobe really doesn't spell check otherwise. So yeah, the Grammarly add-on might be something to look for.
I use it more than I use the, I'm like, I don't want to be an advertisement for Grammarly either though. So
I may have to add that one.
There might be others. I just thought that's one of my weaknesses is spelling. So I use every tool I possibly can.
And that's another thing the read out loud can catch, because I don't know if you caught it when I had the word don't, it said Dante. So sometimes it'll catch some of that misspelling if it's reading out loud and the word is misspelled. It'll pronounce it in a different way.
Awesome. Okay, so where are we at in the PowerPoint? Okay.
I thought it was showing.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's on slide 14. Yeah.
Nice that we're all among friends.
Love
right?
it.
Okay. So considering the tool tip from the beginning, and this is what kind of I think has been the theme as we've been working through today's workshop, is that considering how we are creating the document, not just about what it looks like. So thinking about the way that multiple people will access this information. If it's printed, if it's used electronically, if it's a screen reader. To hesitate when we turn to tables, because it's a very visually organized information. But tables are one of the more difficult to create and make accessible for someone who doesn't access information visually, but uses assistive technology to do so. So rethinking the way that we organize information beyond just a visual effectiveness. And that is that right from the beginning, consider the multiple ways people will access information. Will help us create questions and response formats more intentionally from the very beginning. And then to like each of these steps that Carolyn has taken us through is another opportunity to think about the way that we're being aware of the experience that we're giving to our participants. So kind of how they're going to interact with and how they're going to encounter and how they're going to create meaning from the way that we have developed, written our questions and organized our questions. Okay. Oh, and the last one was the practice, and we've already done that. So I was out of step. So our conclusion is our challenge. So if you, yeah, there you go. Challenge. So include the tooltips labeling in your own PDF forms. Optional is you can upload this into the Canvas the way that we've done each one of these actions each week or each session. And there are the links to the in Canvas course and a link to our Thursday. Oh, I didn't change the date on that one. We're not meeting April 1st. We did meet April 1st, but we'll be meeting April 29th for a workshop. So if you want to work through some of your own forms, you have more questions about tooltips or how to write them or how to consider that tooltip from the very beginning, it's a great time to pop in and work with us on next Thursday. I think that concludes.
Okay, thank you, Sharina. I'm over here fighting with tech. There we go. It's that kind of day. Thank you, Sharina and Carolyn, both for the time today. We have about 15 minutes left, so I feel like this would be a really good time, and it's a really great pause point for those of you who have been with us now for all 4 live sessions to bring some questions to all the panelists. I will let you know that our May 6th session in 2 weeks will just be me and Nick and some guest panelists. Carolyn and Sharina decided to go on vacation. Can't imagine why Hawaii and Florida sound way better than Adobe training. I can't figure this one out. But they will be gone. So it'll be just Nick and myself and some guest panelists. So it'll be a little while but in the live sessions before we have Carolyn and Sharina back. So now is a really good time to open it up for those questions. Or if you guys want to take some time and try to do those tooltips in Adobe Acrobat Pro, Adobe Acrobat DC, if that's where we're at, whatever your software happens to be, and work through those if you run into any challenges. So again, Sharina, Carolyn, thank you always for the insight and the experience and knowledge that you guys bring to these presentations. I can't stress it enough. I want to make sure to open it up now. So. And if you'd like to speak, Nick, can we do an unmute all participants?
I've been playing with that. I don't.
Lost you.
I apologize there. I got a phone call right as I started talking on my cell phone. I'm not seeing an unmute all, but if you raise your hand, I can allow you to talk, or you can send a message in the Q&A or in the chat.
Oh, Nick, I see one open question in the Q&A maybe?
Nope, we answered all of that. We had some thank yous, awesomes, never knew about that tool. A question about the drop-in session. I just sent that directly to her. I didn't see an invite go out for that, so I just gave her the link to the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, and Christine, if you wanted to talk, I think you have to unmute. I thought I saw allow to talk come up on yours. If not, I can undo that.
We do have another comment of really enjoying this class and learning a lot. Awesome, Diane. That is what we strive for. It's the most important for us.
Nick, I do see that we have one phone number. Guessing that I know there's a way that they can raise their hand, but it's not coming to mind off the top of my head. Is it *8?
They might be called in, but watching it. So they would have the Zoom controls on what they're watching, but I'm not sure. I will go ahead and allow to talk, but it's muted on their end just in case.
And I believe *6 is the unmute. So if you've dialed in, we've got you set up so that you can unmute yourself with *6 if you'd like.
Got another thank you, good info.
I could just go through and just do an allow to talk on each of them. And they can unmute if they want to.
You want me to help with that?
Sure.
Okay, I'll start at the bottom.
Some of you may start seeing the option to unmute if you want to jump in with us.
Sorry if I pushed the wrong button.
We're having all kinds of fun.
It's a day. Like I got logged in and then had to log out, and then I didn't know what buttons I was pushing. I will say this has been a fantastic series for me because I have learned so much about, well, why do we do it that way? And researching the information and talking to Lane more about her experiences. And so I've actually learned some things that I'm going to build into my practices so that I can teach you guys to build those into your best practices. So this has been fantastic for me too, to work through all this.
It looks like everybody should be able, we've enabled allow to talk, it looks like, for everybody. So if you'd like to unmute and join us, you're welcome to. Now that I've gone through the participant list, I see some names of folks that are new to a lot of our digital accessibility consortium trainings. So welcome, guys.
Yay.
I know, it's fun to see who's here.
Yes.
I see some names I know.
I'm going to echo your words, Carolyn, and how I thought I knew things, and going through the series has been helpful to see your perspective and your workflow is benefiting mine. So I appreciate it being part of this.
Yeah, and Danielle, yeah, if you have Adobe Pro 9, come to the session on the 29th and we can walk through all of that. It's been a while since I've had that version, so I need to go through and find some of those details for you.
So this is Justin, and I have a quick question for advice. There are several forms that I use on a regular basis that come from our university, and they do not run in order. So if I use the tab function to go through and fill it out, who knows where I'm going to end up on the page.
Okay.
What's the best way to approach somebody about redoing a form?
So this is someone who has created a form and you're doing accessibility reviews on it?
Basically, I'm using it.
Oh, you're using it. Okay.
I'm using the form, and it's one of the things they have is a table. It's a letter of appointment form, and it asks for the course number, the course name, da 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 da. It just goes across, and there's like 6 or 7 rows of that.
Okay.
But if I use the tab function, it might take me to a course number, and then it might take me to a date time on an entirely different line, and then it's not in order. And so I'm just looking for a nice way to approach somebody to say, hey, is there a way that this form could ever be redone? Because it's been bad the entire time I've been here.
I just send an email and pretty much say that, like, hey, I've had some trouble using this form. I think it might be the tab order. Is this something that you can fix and send back to me? And because a lot of the times people don't know that there's an issue. And so just bringing it to an attention and letting them know that this is why I'm struggling with it. Sometimes they're very open to suggestions.
Carolyn, won't we be covering some of how to fix that in your next session towards the end of May too? When you do
yeah, the actual practical of, hey, the reading order is not working, because that's you could have all the rest of the accessibility down, but you haven't checked the logical reading order. That's where the issue that you're talking about, Justin, comes into play. So we are going to talk about the practicals of how to do that later, but the how do I reach out and ask, it can feel a little overwhelming, but sometimes a quick email of, hey, this isn't accessible.
I just don't want to irritate somebody, but maybe I would take my shot at actually redesigning the form using what I'm learning here, and then just say, hey, you guys, I just did this, but it's, maybe you like this better.
Yeah, and I usually do that, this was the problem. Do you need help fixing this? And can we talk about it? That's always a great way to do it, because I honestly don't believe accessibility errors come from a place of malice. They don't intentionally make it out of order. It's just sometimes maybe some of these things, even older versions of forms, if they were built using Microsoft Word X amount of versions ago, maybe those tools weren't even available to make it accessible in the same way. So just reaching out and starting the conversation is a really great, and that's just good for anything. Like, hey, I've noticed a problem. Here's how it affects me. It might affect other people. Could we schedule a time to talk about this, or would you need any help making these changes? So that's a really great approach to do that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I asked Carolyn about that, about your next training, because I was like, that's one thing I like to do when I reach out, and I do this a lot because I run into accessibility challenges every day. I like to be able to grab a link that they can refer to for more information, or direct them, hey, there's this free upcoming training you might be interested in checking out. It could perhaps help with this. Like I like to be that solution oriented. So that was why I double checked. I was thinking that was what we were doing in the second session in May, was the reading order and moving things around a little. So
yeah, and especially when the tab order is out of place with the form fields, and you probably saw this at one of the other ones we did, the one last time. If you don't build them in order, that tab order gets out of whack very quickly. And it's just not something you notice unless you're tabbing through the document. And so that's why kind of being intentional and building that in from the beginning is just another layer and another check to make sure it's accessible. But reaching out when you find an accessible form, hey, I can't access this. I think this is the problem. Could we, do you need some help making this accessible? And if you have someone who, if you have a policy at your university or your agency that you can link to that says, hey, we need to meet this policy requirement, that can also help break the ice if someone is a little resistant to it.
We've got about a 2-minute warning, but I was looking at the participant list and I see a lot of names here, a lot of people here because I had an accessibility barrier and was like, hello, hi, I'm having a challenge here. So it's a lot of fun to see. There's several names here that I think are here because Lane had an accessibility problem.
Yeah, but like I said, a lot of it is just, when I started accessibility, it was, I don't know what I don't know. The very first form I was like, document I gave someone, they asked me, is it accessible? I had no idea what that meant. I thought, maybe? I don't know. I just didn't even know where to start. But I didn't start from a place of, I'm going to make an inaccessible document. It was, I was following, what I thought were good practices. And I've just learned every single document, every single form I've made, I try to make it a little bit more accessible. And so I just challenge myself to do that. And I like making documents. I'm a document nerd. So there's that too. And for some reason on my end, Zoom has completely disappeared. So I can't access any of the tools.
I don't hear any text stuff coming in.
Okay.
And I'm sure Nick would jump in if he saw something too.
Absolutely. Not seeing anything over here.
I can see one tiny video and everything else has disappeared. Oh, there we go. I found it back. Okay.
All right, we've got 1 minute left for questions before our captioner takes off for the day. So I want to take a quick minute and just again say thank you to Anissa for joining us and providing captions.
I think I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. If there's anything else in the last minute here, 30 seconds, feel free to hop on. Otherwise, everyone take care and we'll see you in 2 weeks.